Hello, good morning everybody. It's Dan Wells here, the founder of GrowCEO and GrowCFO. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. So thank you all for joining today's seminar. This is the first webinar that we've had with Andrew Tallents, and we're really excited to launch his series of self-coaching leadership. For those of you new to our portals, I built the portals for leader collaboration, business knowledge and personal development. I hope you're all having a great experience, and please do share any feedback with me. We already have almost 1,100 members, which is great to see. So I've been lucky enough to already experience some of Andrew's one-to-one coaching sessions, and they've been really, really helpful to both my own development and to the business. So I'm really excited to hear from Andrew today. And with that, I will hand over to Andrew for the presentation. Thank you.
Great. And just tell me, obviously, if you can't see my video, I'm not used to necessarily working this system, but thanks for those kind words. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. It's great to be here with you today. Like many of you watching at home, I've managed to find a small corner of my house which feels comfortable enough to work in. You may hear my children in the background. I live in West Kirby in the Wirral. It's one of the windiest towns in England. And at the moment we have 20-mile-an-hour winds outside, so you might actually hear some atmospheric background noise during today's webinar. In my experience, when we learn, it's important to be aware of what's going on around us so we can focus on what's important to us during the time we have together today. So let's all just take a moment to settle into our own space and get ready to learn. This is the first in our series about self-coaching, as Dan said. Today's topic is self-leadership. This is the first time we've actually run this webinar together, so we're going to try the following format today, see how it looks. However, we would welcome feedback from you after the event, so we can modify the format as needed going forward. We've got around an hour together this morning. I'm going to speak for about half of that time, explaining the concepts behind self-leadership. And then we'll have another half an hour or so for any questions that come to mind. As we're going through the presentation today, if any questions come up for you, the best thing to do is please write them in the Q&A box. You should be able to see that on your webinar. And I'll answer all the questions after the presentation. We're actually going to practice this now. So if you could just place into the Q&A box either your name, if you want to, but also where you're calling in from. And we can see if it works and see who's on the call today. Great, so James in London, Martin in New Malden, Simon, Tracy in Lancashire, Fabian. Great, and a few more, so that's working. So that's good. If you want to ask any questions, pop them in there, and then when we get to the end, I'll go through them in turn. Thanks for doing that. Also, if you do have any technical problems during the webinar today, then please write these into the Q&A box. We're going to limit the chat today, and Dan will be able to see those and try and answer any for you. Again, in my recent experience of these webinars, sometimes it just helps to log out, log back in again. You'll be able to get back in if you're experiencing persistent problems. Also, I know Wi-Fi has been slow for many others, so if we do get some lag on the video today, don't worry, we are recording it, and as Dan said, we'll post it onto the Grow portal. We'll also put it onto LinkedIn and other social media, so you will be able to find that after the event. You won't need to write down anything from the slides today because we're going to put them on the web, but actually you may need a pen and paper to hand because I'll be asking you some thought-provoking questions later. So over the next few weeks, we'll be exploring some different aspects of self-coaching. I feel privileged to do what I do day to day. My purpose in life is to help as many leaders as possible to achieve their full potential as human beings. Every day I coach chief executives, finance directors, and other leaders to help them be successful in life. The goal through my coaching is to explore many of the issues on this slide and over a period of time enable the leader to start self-coaching so that they can sustain their own success. So let's explore what self-coaching is. According to the International Coach Federation, the ICF, coaching is defined as a partnership with clients in a thought-provoking and creative process that inspires them to maximize their personal and professional potential. Coaching has a long history dating right back to Socrates. The Socratic method took the premise that people learn best when they have some ownership of a situation and take some form of personal responsibility for the outcome. Consequently, the process favored dialogue between individuals to promote critical thinking and to draw out ideas and underlying presumptions. In modern times, coaching has played a critical role in sports such as tennis, cycling, and football, amongst others. But it was actually Tim Gallwey and Sir John Whitmore who took the movement of coaching from the sporting arena into the business world. In the early 1970s, Tim Gallwey, who was coaching tennis students at the time, began to notice that what was going on in the mind of his students was actually hindering their learning. He started experimenting with ways of helping players learn by developing their awareness of the way they moved around the court and hit the ball, and not by specifically instructing them. He gave it the term the inner game and published his initial findings in The Inner Game of Tennis in 1974. Later that decade, Sir John Whitmore, an ex-racing driver who'd become interested in the field of psychology, trained with Gallwey and realized that these principles could actually be applied to business. He continued his research, and in 1992, he published the book Coaching for Performance. The principles of his book are still used extensively in businesses today. My coaching style, the one that Dan experienced, is based on Gallwey and Whitmore's approach and is focused on enabling the leader to become more self-aware of how they can be more effective in their personal life, their current role, and their personal career management. During my coaching sessions with my clients, we identify ways that the leader can take their learning into everyday situations. Specifically, they learn how to coach themselves in key moments in relation to decision-making and relationship building. We're actually enabling the leader to self-coach so that over time they don't need to spend as much time with me. So, we define self-coaching as the process of leading one's own personal development through self-leadership and the support of others to help maximize their personal and professional potential. The most important discipline in being able to self-coach is self-leadership, and we'll now focus on what this is and how to develop this key skill. Self-leadership is all about understanding who you are, how you behave, and then deciding to change that behavior if it's going to enable you to fulfill your potential as a human being. I would like you all to consider a question. Have a think for a few moments about the people you normally interact with week to week. Can you think of anyone in your life who tends to moan about their personal situation and blames others for what is happening to them in their own lives? Someone who you think should stop playing the victim and should just get off their backside and do something about their situation. If you can think of someone that comes to mind, please write their name down on a piece of paper or hold it in your mind. I'm going to do the same thing. Someone comes immediately to mind for me. Now, I'd like you to think about some of the people that you trust the most in your lives and try and think whether during the last few months, if they were asked the same question, they may have written your name down and said the same thing. Stop playing the victim. What are you going to do about the situation you find yourself in? I want to take you back to the winter of 1984. Do They Know It's Christmas was the Christmas #1. The first Apple Macs were on sale, and the miners' strike was in full swing. I was 15 years old and living in Manchester in the UK. My dad was working away in Saudi Arabia. My mum was suffering serious health problems and needed to be cared for. And my younger brother was really struggling mentally with my dad being away for those long periods, and this led him to playing truant from school. I was personally excited that my dad had invited the whole family out to Jeddah, where he worked, for Christmas. What should have been an exciting adventure soon became a sudden realization of my coming of age. My dad confided in me how big the problems were with my mum and brother, and asked for my help in supporting them while he was away. I came home, took my mock GCSEs, and once I received the poor results, I realized that I needed to completely rethink the way I live my life. This was my first experience of being forced to develop self-leadership as a discipline. Self-leadership can be defined as the intentional influencing of the way we think, feel, and behave to achieve our personal and professional goals in life. It's the intentional influencing of the way we think, feel, and behave to achieve our personal and professional goals in life. And it's the intentional piece which is really important. In reality, many people only practice self-leadership when a life-changing event happens to them, and they need to react in some way and take control of the situation. We can all think of friends and family that have displayed courage and tenacity to get themselves out of difficult situations. Yet in everyday life, some of us tend to put up with the status quo, as there is no burning platform to force us to act. I have been in all but one of these situations listed on this page, and on every occasion, I have at some point had to lead myself to a better place. Take a few moments for yourself now to think about when you've responded with self-leadership in the face of adversity. To bring self-leadership to life for you, I want to use an analogy that Andrew Tallents uses in his book, Self-Leadership. I want you to think about your own personal journey through life. I would like you to think about the key relationships in your life. Those with your parents, with your siblings, with your partner, within your team, within your organization, with your boss, with your friends. And I want you to think particularly about one relationship that maybe isn't where you want it to be at the moment. I would just like to take a few moments to write the name of that person down now so they're forefront of mind. Next, I would like you to imagine yourself driving in this vehicle on the left-hand side there on this steep and dangerous mountain road in the Swiss Alps. And by your side is the person you want to have a better relationship with, the one you've written down. You are in the passenger seat of the car, and the other person is in the driver's seat of the car. The driver of the vehicle is, of course, in charge of the speed that you go down the mountain. They're in charge of how you take the corners down the mountain. And they generally make you feel comfortable about the experience that you're having together down the mountain slope. If as a passenger in this vehicle, you become the backseat driver and complain and become judgmental in how the driver is making you feel and taking the corners and the speed they're going, it's probably time that you think about taking up self-leadership with regards to that relationship. This is the time that you should work with the other person to decide when it is your turn to sit in the driver's seat. Some of you may have come across this Wheel of Life before. This is another useful tool to enable you to think about whether you are adopting self-leadership in these important aspects of your life that sometimes become neglected when you're working hard. How are you looking after your mental well-being and your personal development? How are you looking after your physical well-being? How are you engaging with society and culture in your life? How you're dealing with the spiritual and ethical aspects of your life? Where do you sit in relation to your role in your family at home at the moment? And how are you managing your finances and your career goals? Are you actually in the driving seat in these areas, or are other people in your life deciding where you're going? I am fortunate to have worked with a variety of leaders who have chosen to practice self-leadership with my support, and I've seen big improvements in the following areas of their lives. I have seen more self-awareness about who they are and how their behaviors affect their own feelings and those of others around them. I've seen more self-confidence in their ability to be in charge of their own lives and work towards their goals. I've seen a better understanding of their purpose in life and why they're here and who they serve. I see decreased stress and anxiety due to being more accepting of what they can and can't control in their lives. Increased happiness due to feeling more fulfilled in their lives and positive about their relationships. And with regard to their relationships, they tend to be deeper due to the fact they are more authentic, trustworthy, and vulnerable in the way they live their lives. However, taking decisions to lead your own life is not easy for any of us. We have a fear of making the wrong decisions, and therefore we miss opportunities and assess risks incorrectly. We don't think we have permission to say no to people where we know the action does not serve us on our own journey. We don't sometimes think we have the right to say yes to what is important to us, as we are often thinking about others first. We're all hardwired to a certain extent from our childhood in the way we make decisions, and this is partly due to the environments in which we have grown up. Another model that helps us and supports us in becoming self-leaders is Cartman's drama triangle, which some of you may have come across. In any of our relationships, we tend to sit in one of these three positions of the triangle. The other person in the relationship sits in one of the other places. Here's a quick example of how this works within our family. My 13-year-old son has a certain amount of credits to use on an online game on his Xbox, which is on a lot at the moment. I bought him the credits as a birthday gift on the understanding that he would not ask for any more credits when they ran out. Guess what? They ran out last week, and he came to ask me for more money to buy more credits. I immediately took the position on the right-hand side of the triangle of persecutor and used my position of power to withhold funds and make him feel the consequences of his mistake. He then took the victim position, telling me it wasn't fair and that I was mean. I didn't understand how important it was for him to be able to play with his friends on the online game. My wife then entered the room, saw him in the victim position, and felt that I had been unfair to him. She felt sorry for him, so gave him the opportunity to earn some more money by doing some jobs, and in doing so, took on the rescuer position with him and the persecutor position with me. As far as I was concerned, this undermined my authority in the relationship with my son, and I became the victim in the relationship with my wife, blaming her for not agreeing with my stance. And so the drama triangle unfolds in any family argument. I'm sure that some of you can relate to this in terms of what we're talking about. Now, this drama triangle actually exists in many of our relationships, and it is only by us learning the discipline of self-leadership that can help us break free of this drama triangle. Take a moment now to actually think about a drama triangle that exists in your relationships. Which of the three positions feels more comfortable for you, and which one do you tend to adopt? This diagram shows that by becoming more self-aware about which position we are in, we can actually take a self-leadership approach to break free of the triangle and release the potential within ourselves and the relationship. The persecutor can become the challenger in the relationship by becoming more assertive and less controlling. The rescuer can become the coach by actually becoming more caring and listening to when we really need help. And finally, the victim can become creator by accepting their own vulnerability and realizing they have the power to solve their own problems with support. Take a moment again to think about how you can move to a better place in this triangle in a relationship that is tough at the moment. To become a self-leader in any aspect of our lives, we need to start creating some choices and making some decisions. This is not as easy as it sounds. If we take responsibility for ourselves and let others take responsibility for themselves, then we can take the first steps to self-leadership. We need to be responsible for our own thoughts, feelings, speech, and behavior. We need to be responsible to the commitments we make to ourselves and others. But we are not responsible for the way that other people behave, think, or feel around us. In light of this, ask yourself the question, how dysfunctional is my team at the moment on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is completely functional, it's high performing, and 10 is completely dysfunctional, it just doesn't work. Take a moment to think about what this number is for you and write this number down for me now. Most leaders I ask this question of tend to score between 5 and 10, i.e. towards dysfunctionality. So if that's the case, ask yourself as a leader, how do I contribute to that dysfunctionality? What behaviors of mine impact negatively on the team? Take another moment to reflect on this in your own situation. Once you become aware of this, you can actually now ask yourself the question, what can I do tomorrow to enable the team to function more effectively and move the dysfunctionality score to a lower number? You can see how this works. I think it's important to actually try and understand when you're actually exhibiting this behavior, you are demonstrating self-leadership so that others can actually follow you more easily. So having gained more understanding of self-leadership, what are the first steps we can take as leaders on the journey to becoming more effective self-leaders? First of all, don't wait for a life-changing event. Be proactive. Try and practice self-leadership every day. Secondly, raise self-awareness about your behavior in key relationships. Gain feedback from trusted partners on how you can make their lives easier. Where do you want to be the driver in your relationships? And indeed, where do you want to be the passenger? Sometimes it's appropriate. Who decides which role you take at what time? Set clear goals around your self-leadership and communicate them to others. Ask others to help you to hold yourself to account. Take responsibility for your own actions. You are not responsible for how others feel or behave. And finally, get support from friends, mentors, coaches on every step of the journey. So, to today's call of action. For some of us, self-leadership is going to be a long and tough journey, and I'm still finding it difficult today after all these years since that 15-year-old boy. If this is a journey you would like to take, then I would ask you to think about doing the following. First of all, decide whether you are prepared to lead yourself. Look at your key relationships. Are you the driver or the passenger? Look at the key areas of your life. Are you leading a balanced life on that balance wheel of life? And where you practice self-leadership, assess where you sit in the drama triangle of a relationship and be aware of where you want to sit in the future. Take responsibility for your own life is the most important thing. I hope you've enjoyed today's introduction to self-leadership. There's so much more beneath the surface and that you've learned something about yourself. I'm keen to support the Grow community and agreed with Dan that Grow members can benefit from a limited offer that we're working on at the moment. We're offering a complimentary 30-minute Zoom call with me to assess where you are in your own personal development journey and how self-coaching might support you on that journey. And from those calls, we'll actually offer a limited number of complimentary 2-hour coaching sessions focused on self-coaching. These will be available for those leaders who believe they're going to gain the most benefit from spending that time with me and really want to practice it. Just let me know after today. For those who are interested in reading around the subject, these are 3 books I would recommend, and I would read them in this order. The first one, you probably come across the 1 Minute Manager books. This is a really nice story that goes through a leader that is struggling with various different relationships and takes a self-leadership approach by taking the advice of a mentor. There's a narrator in the book. The second book, Self-Leadership by Andrew Bryant, is the book that really resonated with me the most, around the analogy of the car going down the mountain and whether you're the passenger or the driver. Lots of really rich stories in that book to bring it to life for you. And then thirdly, I would read the final self-leadership book. This is slightly more academic, slightly more research-based, but tends to bring you some underpinning in terms of the theory and the thinking behind it, but certainly all worth a read. Finally, I would invite you all to think about one area of your life where you can take the wheel, take the driver's seat, and determine the direction that you will travel in the coming weeks and months. You've got a real opportunity to think about this now. Take a moment to commit to one small step forward and share that step with someone that you trust. Thanks for listening, and we're now going to move into the Q&A, and I'm hoping there's some questions in there. We had some questions prior to the event today, so we'll actually have a quick look at those and just see what's come through. Great. So we have a question here coming through. We've got some comments around, will the slides be posted? We will post the GrowCFO website, the books, titles, and also the slides, but we are going to post this webinar onto the Grow portal. We also had another question that's come in, which is, what gets in the way of becoming a self-leader? It's really interesting working with my clients in that the thing that tends to get in the way is actually how much they really want it in the first place. So we explore that quite a bit in terms of what is it the individual really wants to get out of self-leadership, how is it going to benefit them, and almost trying to link some of their goals to that approach of self-leadership. And then what tends to get away is discipline, really. So if you think about you saying, I'm going to get fitter in the next 6 weeks, then that really calls for your own self-leadership to make that happen. And of course, we all don't do that. So holding yourself to account, having that self-discipline is one of the key things that a lot of leaders struggle with because they're just so busy and other things get in the way. And obviously that's reality. I think another thing that gets in the way, and probably a lot of you can relate to this, is self-limiting beliefs. I was with a client yesterday and we were working through the fact that he wanted to build a better relationship with one of his senior leaders in the organization who he didn't have direct contact with, and he was putting excuses in the way that the organization didn't allow him to build that relationship, which of course was a self-limiting belief. The organization operates in the way it operates, but it's the way he believed it operated. So that tends to get in the way, and also our inbuilt fears. A main one with leaders tends to be fear of failure, fear of not knowing the answer, fear of looking stupid, fear of falling short. So there's a lot of these that again come from our childhood, and our parents have a lot to do with this in terms of these fears that we have. And through the coaching sessions, we work through some of those and try and enable the leader to actually work out that most of them are actually irrational. I guess I just wanted to give you an example. Somebody's asked a question here about, can you give a real life example of how this works? And there are probably two that I'll talk about which are extremes. The first is I worked with a client about a year ago who had 2 or 3 sessions with me. And then at the end of the 3rd session, he actually just stood up from his chair and actually said to me, Andrew, even though this has been great what we're doing and we've been working towards our goals, I recognize that's not important. What's actually important is that in this role as managing director, I need to actually feel comfortable feeling uncomfortable. And I need to lead myself in that, and I need your help in it. And it took him 3 2-hour sessions to work that out. So he actually worked very quickly out about how he could lead himself and it was him that decided that with me challenging him. At the other extreme, I had a newly appointed CEO in the aviation sector who I'm actually still working with now 12 months later. And because he's got so much going on in his world in the aviation sector, he's found it more difficult to be disciplined and to actually lead himself because he thinks it's more effective to lead his team. And he's starting to fall short a little bit in terms of things that he's really wanting to do for himself. So again, it shows the extremes. Typically, I think that leaders can learn to self-coach in around about 6 months on average, working really hard at it. Some can do it earlier, and some it takes a bit longer. All I would say is that, you know, a good friend, a good colleague, a mentor or a coach can actually help with that. So I'm just going to see if any more questions have come in. Yeah, we've got a couple more. So here we've got, how would you best approach stress and anxiety, which is heightened with the current CV-19 outbreak? Really good question. Obviously, we've got specialists in the portal that can actually talk to you more about this. But what I found with my clients is that certainly having that self-leadership approach and having that understanding what your goals are and therefore what your purpose is and why it's worth still working towards that in some way, combined with some mindfulness and some fitness, that well-being side, means that sometimes the mindfulness, once you practice, combined with the self-leadership, can start to make you relax a lot more and reduce the stress and anxiety because it enables you to realize what's important and what's not. So that's one thing that my clients have worked on together, but I know that within the Grow portal, there's the more support for you there in terms of relation to that question. Another question is, you mentioned that we solve problems mainly in the way that we learned in our childhood, and I believe this process is related to our values. How difficult is it to get this introspection done? And if they are not the best, how can these be managed to be different? It's a really good question. In my experience, and I'm happy to be challenged here, your values and what's important to you tend to be set and hardwired by the time you're 17 or 18 years old. And it's usually a life-changing event when you're older that will change those values. So in answer to your question, I think what it's important to do in relation to self-leadership is understand who you are and what values are important to you, and therefore why you do certain things, and accept that, be accepting of it. It's very difficult to change that because it's within you, it's within your core. And as I say, usually it's an external event that will change those things. I'm pleased to say that there are some tools out there, some psychometric and some other tools that enable you to self-analyze what is important to you and what those values are. And I regularly help clients with understanding what those values are, accepting that they're important to them, and then starting to live them each day, particular ones that they may be lost or they started to lose. And there's certainly a lot of evidence published and research published that if you identify what your values are, let's say they're altruism, they're being opinionated, they're actually having a family unit, they're really important to you, and you lose one of those things, then it usually does demotivate you to the extent that you'll probably change direction in your career. So being aware of what your values are and why they're important and why you need them in your work is really important. And again, we can talk offline about that in other ways you might do it. Another question, how feasible is it to practice self-leadership when your business is effectively a one-man band? Do you need a friend, mentor, contact to bounce ideas off? Well, that's a really great question, and what you've done there is really answered it in the sense of you as a self-leader working out that what you need to really become effective is someone to bounce ideas off, obviously is you self-leading yourself. And yes, I think it really does help. There's the analogy of coaches and mentors in terms of the lamppost effect, in the sense that if you were to go and speak to a lamppost for an hour, then you probably would feel better for it at the end of it, and you probably would have worked out quite a lot of things that are on your mind. I think where a friend, a mentor, or a coach can help you is by actually really listening to you and playing back to you what you're saying and what that might mean for you in terms of some of the things that are holding you back. And certainly in my challenging coaching, I challenged leaders to actually try to think differently and probably remove some of the assumptions and limiting beliefs and fears that they're displaying to me. So yeah, it's a good question. Certainly one-man bands can do that, but they can also self-lead. So I'm aware of time. It's 20 to 12, and I know you've all got other things to do. There are no other questions that have come in. Dan, I'm not sure if you've got any thoughts before we wrap things up.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. And we've had a couple of questions come through the webinar chat as well.
Great.
I don't know, have you seen those?
I haven't, so let me. Great. No, I haven't. Can you read those to me?
Sure. And so one of them was, what other topics or themes will you be covering during your webinar series, and how frequently will you be running the webinars?
Great. Well, Dan and I have talked about this, and we're hoping to run the webinars every 2 weeks. We have got this Easter coming up, so we're going to agree after this session how it's gone today, what the feedback's been like, and we're hoping to do them fortnightly. If you go back to the first slide I presented, they're all the topics we're going to be discussing to a certain extent. So we're going to be talking about accountability, we're going to be talking about resilience, we're going to be talking about trust, we're going to be talking about fears, we're going to be talking about systemic thinking, about, particularly in today's environment, how we actually think about the system that's around us and how that affects our self-leadership and how we coach ourselves. We think there's probably between 10 and 15 topics over the next 30 weeks or so that we're going to be presenting on.
Thank you. And we've got another question from Phil. Does showing a level of vulnerability with other team members or employees assist the process of becoming a better leader?
It's a really good question, and it's the one thing that comes up usually in the third or fourth session of my work with clients, because it takes time to get clients to become more vulnerable and admit that they're not perfect, and that's very difficult as a leader. So it's a very valid question, and the answer generally is yes. I think that if you're a leader and you've got team members who think that you know everything, and that you are perfect, and that you never make any mistakes, and that you are Teflon, and that actually everything you do just works, at the end of the day, they're probably going to think that you don't need any help. And of course, we're all human beings and we do need help. So I think, as I've tried to do with you today, in terms of sharing a couple of things that I've been involved in with my family and my earlier life, it means you understand me better and you understand why self-leadership is so important to me, and therefore hopefully you believe in what I'm saying, because I believe in it. So I think that vulnerability is really important. And one example I will give you with a client I'm working with at the moment is the client has got a problem with two of their direct reports where they're not getting on, and she's having to intervene all the time to try and get them to work. So tomorrow she's going to get a three-way Zoom call together and actually get the two of them together with her to tell them how she is feeling, and the fact that it's making her feel emotionally difficult, and that it's taking a lot of her energy out of the actual business. And so she's being very open with them, how it's making her feel. And what she's going to do is get them to work together on how they can support her better by sorting it out themselves. So vulnerability is a key skill. There's a great book by Brené Brown. If you look up Brené Brown, Brené, and then Brown, as in the color. Best place to go probably is her TED Talk, which is all about vulnerability. And it's a very interesting presentation. There's a book that follows up with that as well.
Thank you, Andrew. We've got another question from Tony. Do you have any advice about how to manage upwards for a new line manager?
Really good question. So I'm going to assume there that when you say for a new line manager, there's somebody that's coming above you, and you're having to manage them in terms of that upward relationship. Is that fair, Dan?
Yes.
Yep. Yeah. So I think it's a really good question. Where it's worked with my clients in the past, generally, is where there's been a very open relationship to start with, where as the person that's reporting into that line manager, you're trying to get them to open up to you about what they're worried about and what they might need your support in. So a good opening question in any first session is, what is it that I can help you with in terms of the first 3 months or so that will help you to do your job more effectively? And I think that kind of question means that rather than you leading them in a way, you're getting to understand where they might need your support. Now, it might be that you don't want to offer that support. It might be you choose to do something different, but at least you understand where their problems are going to be, and it might be you can find a solution from somewhere else. So I think an open dialogue, open communication, and also sharing with them where you need support from them in terms of their line management of you, and where to actually leave you to get on with it, and trying to set those boundaries early on and take that self-leadership approach with your line manager. As all of you know, line managers are not always great in those first few months in terms of trying to work out how to work with you as the individual.
Thank you, Andrew. We've got another question about if you've got any advice for people who are starting a new role.
Sure. This is really interesting. I work a lot with people who start new roles. So you obviously take on a new role for a reason. And the reason you take that role on is an important place to start. So if the reason you've taken the role on is to challenge yourself in a particular area of a sector or a subject matter, then it's important that you actually talk to your line manager that you're reporting into, or indeed the board, it's the board, about what you really want to do in this role and the things that you want to actually put your mind to. And the reason you want to do that is for these reasons. So it's setting the stall out about, even though you have the title of FD or managing director and there's a role job specification, it doesn't say within that job specification the way in which you will go about it. So I think actually making everyone aware that's a stakeholder about what it is you want to achieve yourself, what that means for the business, and what kind of support you need from people around you to do that is a really important first step when you get into a new role. I think sometimes we let the organization manage our induction, we let them set the tone in terms of what it is we want to do, but most of the time they're not really sure, because they've not been close to actually the role that you've gone into. So that's probably what I would say there.
Okay, and thank you, Andrew. The final question that we had this yesterday during our Future CFOs program, and if anyone's keen to attend a future cohort, please do let me know. The question was, what should people do to try and increase their chances of getting an internal promotion?
Good question. The first thing that comes to mind is to actually find out who are all the stakeholders that would have a say in whether you got that internal promotion or not. And they're not always obvious. I'm working with a leader now in Germany who has that actual problem. She doesn't know who has in the final say or a contribution to the say in terms of when she gets promoted. So that's the first step. Do a stakeholder map, which I can talk about to you separately, understand who actually is involved in that decision. Secondly, then gain clarity, as much as you can, from the consensus of those decision makers about what needs to happen for you to gain that promotion. What behaviors do you need to demonstrate? What do you need to achieve? And then really understand that. And then thirdly, once you're starting to work towards those actions, checking in with those decision makers about how you're actually doing in relation to those particular objectives and what feedback do they have for you in terms of how you actually need to improve. Those three approaches leave very little to chance as long as you're performing. But you can see that if you do leave one of those three areas to chance, that it can actually be where you really perform, you think you're doing well, but actually you've actually forgotten about the decision maker that's going to say no to you because they don't really understand who you are. So that's how I'd answer that question.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Andrew. I'm sure everybody will join me in a huge thank you to Andrew for those really insightful points today. I've certainly left the session feeling that I'm really looking forward to the next ones and can't wait to hear more from Andrew. We will be posting a live recording of this, so you can get this on demand within the portals. And if you have any questions for myself or Andrew, please do go to the homepage where you can type our name, and if you click say hello, you can send us a private message. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. A couple of more things before I go. This is my remember now, and thanks for that, Dan, is to say that if you want to shape the subjects that we go into next, then have a look at that front page, those hashtags. If there's anything that you particularly want us to cover next, then please let us know, and if there's a real strength of feeling about one of them, we'll do that next. And finally, just wish you all good luck on the self-leadership journey. If you need my support, to go through the Grow portal and drop me a line. Thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.